Hey everyone, and welcome. Today, we're diving into a really influential book by Hans Rosling called Factfulness, and it's all built around this powerful and honestly kind of startling idea that our basic picture of the world, things like global poverty, population, all that stuff, is often completely and systematically wrong.
Okay, so let's just jump right in with a little exercise Rosling himself loved to do. He'd ask this question to everyone from students to global leaders. So take a second and think of a number. What percentage of the entire world's population was living in extreme poverty just 20 years ago? Just take a guess.
Okay, you got your number? The answer was 29%. And today, that number has plummeted to just 9%. Now, if you guessed higher than that, don't worry, you are in very good company. See, most people get this wrong, and that brings us right to the heart of Rosling's entire life's work.
Because what Rosling discovered was that these weren't just random mistakes, it was actually worse than random. It was like people were systematically guessing that the world was more frightening, more violent, and way more hopeless than it actually is. He gave this a name, the over-dramatic worldview.
So who was this doctor who basically diagnosed the whole world with a case of ignorance? Well, let's meet Hans Rosling. He was a Swedish physician, a brilliant statistician, but the title he gave himself is probably the most revealing. He called himself a possibilist. And Rosling was super clear about this. He would say, look, I'm not an optimist. That makes me sound naive. Nope, he was a possibilist. That's someone who builds their worldview on a clear-eyed, reasonable idea of how things actually are. So it's not about blind positivity at all. It's about being factual. And one of his most powerful tools for this was just throwing out that old model of developed countries versus developing countries. He said it's totally outdated. Instead, he came up with these 4 income levels. And this isn't just, a neat little data trick. It completely changes your perspective. You suddenly realize the huge majority of humanity lives in the middle. This reframes how we should think about literally everything, from global business to foreign aid.
So why are we all walking around with this over-dramatic worldview? Well, Rosling said it's because of 10 basic human instincts that just distort how we see things. Let's take a look at 3 of the big ones.
First up, we've got the gap instinct. This is our brain's love of splitting things into 2 neat boxes. It's good versus bad, us versus them, the rich versus the poor. It feels simple, it feels dramatic. But like those 4 income levels just showed us, the world is almost never that black and white. Most people live in the middle, right in that supposed gap. Next up is the negativity instinct. This explains why bad news seems to be everywhere, and why we always have this feeling that things are getting worse. Think about it. A slow, gradual improvement over decades just isn't a sexy headline. A plane crash is. Rosling used to say that our ability to monitor suffering has gotten so much better, which, weirdly enough, makes it feel like there's more of it, even when the opposite is true. And this is a really crucial point. Just because you recognize that things are improving, that does not mean you're saying everything is fine and dandy. Rosling was adamant that we have to hold 2 thoughts in our heads at the same time. Things can be bad, but also getting better. That nuance, that's the heart of factfulness.
Okay, our third instinct is the size instinct. This is our tendency to just get things totally out of proportion, especially when we see one big, scary, lonely number, like this one, 4.2 million. That's how many babies died before their first birthday back in 2016. It's a horrific number. It's almost impossible to even wrap your head around it.
But here's the rule Rosling taught. You can never leave a number by itself. You have to compare it. So let's do that. Back in 1950, that number was 14.4 million. All of a sudden, that 4.2 million figure, while it is still an absolute tragedy, is also a sign of unbelievable progress. It is the lowest that number has ever been in all of human history. Context changes everything. Now, Rosling's framework, it's undeniably powerful. But some critics have argued that in his quest to fight our pessimism, he might have accidentally created his own kind of distortion.
So the main criticism, which you can see laid out here by Professor Christian Berggren, is that Rosling might be guilty of a kind of unbalanced optimism. The argument is basically that he cherry-picked the positive trends while kind of downplaying or even ignoring some really troubling negative ones.
And critics point to a pretty clear pattern here. For instance, Rosling will highlight the decline in big oil spills, which is great news, but the book doesn't really talk about the staggering rise of plastics in the ocean. He celebrates that we have more protected nature. Fantastic. But there's no chart showing the catastrophic drop in global biodiversity. The worry is that this selective focus, even if it's well-intentioned, could make us a little too complacent about some of the biggest challenges we're facing. So, where does all this leave us? Well, the goal here isn't to pick a side, Team Rosling versus Team Critic. It's about taking the best ideas from everybody to build ourselves a better, more fact-based mental toolbox.
And kind of ironically, Rosling himself gives us the perfect piece of advice for this. He warned us about something he called the single perspective instinct. You know the saying, if all you have is a hammer, everything starts to look like a nail. He begged us to be open to different ideas and to let people who disagree with us test our own beliefs.
So here are a few tools we can put in that toolbox, inspired by both Rosling and his critics. First, just start to notice when your dramatic instincts are getting triggered. Second, always put numbers in context. Third, just be a little suspicious of stories that are too simple, whether they're stories about doom and gloom or stories about everything being amazing. And finally, welcome that complexity. Seek out the other side of the story. Because at the end of the day, this is the big takeaway. Factfulness isn't a personality type. It's a practice. It's a skill. It's this stress-reducing habit of replacing your dramatic feelings with a worldview based on actual facts. It's about understanding the world more clearly. And when you do that, it lets you see progress where it exists without being naive. And it lets you see the huge challenges we face without falling into despair. It helps you focus on what really matters. So, I'll leave you with this question. After all this, what's one piece of news, one statistic, that you think you'll look at with fresh eyes now?